Alexander Whitmore grabbed a full glass of red wine and poured every drop of it over a black man's head in front of 400 people and laughed like he'd just won something. The ballroom went dead silent. Then Daniel Brooks reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made one call. $3 billion vanished before dessert was served. But here's what nobody in that room knew, and what you won't believe until the very end of this story. Drop a comment with your city right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. You won't want to miss what comes next. The wine hit him like a verdict. Not a splash. Not an accident. A deliberate slow pour, the kind a man makes when he wants every person in the room to understand exactly what he thinks of you. Alexander Whitmore tilted that crystal glass at an angle, and the deep red Cabernet cascaded down over Daniel Brooks's forehead, soaked through his collar, saturated his jacket, and dripped from his chin onto the polished marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom. 400 people saw it. 400 people. Billionaires, senators, hedge fund managers, celebrities with private jets and houses in 4 states, and not one of them moved. Not one of them said a word. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The servers froze. Somewhere near the back of the room, a woman in a silver dress covered her mouth. A man in a tuxedo looked away. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations died. 400 people who had spent their entire careers learning how to project power and confidence, and every single one of them chose silence. Daniel stood completely still. He didn't flinch. He didn't back away. He didn't raise his hands or his voice. He just stood there, wine dripping from his jaw, running down the back of his neck, soaking into the white shirt beneath his jacket, while Alexander Whitmore laughed a loud, self-satisfied laugh and looked around the room like he expected applause. And then, Daniel Brooks did the last thing anyone in that ballroom expected. He looked at Alexander Whitmore, not with rage, not with embarrassment, not with the wounded expression of a man who had just been destroyed in public, but with something far more devastating. He looked at him with pity. "I hope that made you feel important." 7 words. Calm. Quiet. The way you speak to someone you've already decided doesn't matter. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Daniel Brooks had been invisible his entire life. Not in the way people sometimes say as a figure of speech. Not invisible like people didn't notice him at parties, or he was quiet in meetings. Invisible the way black men in America learned to be invisible because visibility costs too much. Because the wrong kind of attention in the wrong room with the wrong people ends careers before they start ends conversations, before they begin ends opportunities, before you ever get close enough to reach for them. He had learned this before he could read. He grew up in Dayton, Ohio in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city where the carpet was the color of old rust and the radiator knocked all winter like something trying to get out. His mother, Gloria, worked double shifts at a dry cleaning plant 6 days a week, pressing other people's expensive clothes with hands that cracked and bled in the winter. His father left before Daniel started first grade, not violently, not dramatically. Just one morning. He was there and the next morning, he wasn't. And Gloria never cried about it in front of her son. She just got up earlier and came home later. Daniel learned by watching her. He learned that dignity was not something anyone gave you. You built it yourself quietly every single day in the choices you made when nobody important was watching. You built it by showing up, by keeping your word, by doing the work even when the work was invisible, even when no one acknowledged it, even when the world looked straight at you and decided you weren't there. He was 12 years old when he first understood that the world had a category for him, and that category had nothing to do with who he actually was. It happened at a school science fair in Oakwood, the predominantly white suburb where his gifted program school was located. He'd spent 6 weeks building a working solar-powered water filtration model, had stayed up past midnight 3 times to get the filtration membranes calibrated correctly, had written a 14-page research paper to accompany it. His teacher, Mrs. Portman, had called it extraordinary. She'd said she'd never seen anything like it from a 7th grader. He got to the fair early that morning, set up his display, and stood proudly behind his project. A man in a navy blazer. Someone's father walked by, glanced at the project, glanced at Daniel, and immediately turned to the white student at the next table. "This is wonderful. Did you build this yourself?" He was pointing at Daniel's project. The boy at the next table, Ryan Callahan, who'd built a papier-mâché volcano, looked confused. "That's not mine, that's his." The man in the navy blazer turned, looked at Daniel again, and without a word of acknowledgement, moved on. Not an apology, not a correction, just a pivot like Daniel had been a door he'd accidentally pushed in the wrong direction. Daniel stood there and said nothing. He breathed through it. He went home and told his mother, and Gloria sat down at the kitchen table across from him and held both his hands in hers and looked at him like she wanted to shield him from something she knew she couldn't. "Baby," she said, "the world is going to keep doing that, and you have two choices every time it does. You can let it make you small, or you can let it make you hungry. Don't ever let it make you small." He chose hungry. He graduated high school at the top of his class, earned a full scholarship to Ohio State, then a second scholarship to Wharton Business School, where he was one of 11 black students in a cohort of 240. He learned everything there was to learn about capital markets, private equity leveraged buyouts, distressed assets portfolio management. He graduated in the top 3% of his class, and then, instead of taking one of the lucrative investment banking positions that came recruiting at Wharton's career fairs, he went home to Dayton and started a company with $40,000 he'd saved working nights and weekends through his entire graduate program. He called it Brooks Capital Group. His first investment was a black-owned hardware store in Dayton's historic West End neighborhood that had been bleeding money for 2 years. The owner, a 67-year-old man named Earl Hodges, had been one step away from closing his doors when Daniel walked in and sat down at his cluttered desk. "I've been to 3 banks," Earl told him. "Every single one of them told me the same thing. Too risky." "They're wrong," Daniel said. "Your inventory system is outdated. Your supplier contracts are overpriced, and you're understaffed in the wrong areas. None of that is a business problem. That's a systems problem. Systems can be fixed." Earl looked at this young man across from him and said, "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm not trying to own your business. I'm trying to help you keep it." 18 months later, Earl Hodges's hardware store was profitable for the first time in a decade. Daniel had restructured the supply chain, brought in a new point-of-sale system, helped Earl hire 2 additional staff members, and renegotiated every vendor contract. He didn't take a large fee. He took a small equity stake and a promise that Earl would stay in business. He did it again with a black-owned restaurant in Cleveland, then a manufacturing company in Indianapolis, then a logistics firm in Detroit. He moved quietly, deliberately, without press releases or investor conferences or TED Talks. He didn't want attention. He wanted results. By the time Daniel was 30, Brooks Capital Group had invested in 47 companies across 12 states. By 32, the firm managed assets worth over $1 billion. By 34, the number had tripled. But nobody outside of a very small circle knew his name. He wanted it that way. He became a father. The way most profound things happen in life. Not according to plan, but in a moment that rearranges everything and makes the plan seem small and beside the point. Her name was Marcus, and he was 6 years old, and he had his father's eyes. The story of how Daniel became a single father was not simple, and he did not tell it often, and he never told it to strangers. His partner Alicia had died of a brain aneurysm 23 months after Marcus was born. She was 29 years old. She had been healthy. She had been brilliant. A public school teacher who could make a second grader fall in love with fractions. She had been the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and called her grandmother every Sunday and cried at commercials for pet adoption. She was here, and then she was not. And Daniel was left alone in a 2-story house in Columbus with a toddler and a grief so large it had no edges. The first year he barely functioned. He ran the company on autopilot. His team was excellent, and they held things together while he learned how to be both mother and father. He learned how to braid Marcus's hair, though it took 6 months before he could do it without Marcus wincing. He learned how to pack lunches and sign permission slips and navigate the labyrinthine bureaucracy of pediatric healthcare. He learned how to talk about Alicia in a way that kept her present without breaking himself apart. Marcus was now 6, and he was the reason Daniel had agreed to attend the Whitmore Gala in the first place. Not because he cared about galas. He cared about one specific project, a community development initiative that Whitmore Industries had been publicly championing, a plan to invest in mixed-income housing and economic development in urban centers across the Midwest. Daniel had read every document, had spoken with community leaders in 3 cities, had done his own independent analysis. If the initiative was genuine, if Whitmore Industries actually intended to follow through, rather than use it as a public relations vehicle, the impact could be profound. Real investment in real communities. Jobs. Infrastructure. Opportunity. He thought about Marcus. He thought about the neighborhood in Dayton where he'd grown up and the families still there, and what a genuine injection of capital and development might mean for them. He had drafted a commitment for $3 billion. $3 billion, structured over 7 years, tied to specific performance benchmarks, community oversight requirements, and transparency measures that would ensure the money went where it was supposed to go, rather than evaporating into management fees and executive bonuses. All he needed to do was meet Alexander Whitmore in person. He needed to look this man in the eye and confirm his character. Because Daniel had learned at 12 years old at the Wharton case studies table in 47 investment decisions across 12 states, that the financials told you whether a business could succeed, but the person told you whether it should. So he dressed carefully that evening. He chose a clean dark suit, not flashy, not expensive looking, because he had long ago decided that the people who needed to display wealth were the people who were afraid it wasn't real. He didn't need anyone to know who he was. He didn't need the room to bow in his direction. He just needed to watch. The Grand Meridian Hotel was the kind of place that existed to make you feel like you had arrived somewhere that mattered. The ceilings were 30 feet high. The chandeliers were Austrian crystal. The marble floors had been imported from quarries in Italy, or so the placard near the entrance claimed. Everything about the building said the people inside this room are important, and if you are inside this room, so are you. Daniel had been inside rooms like this before. They didn't impress him. What he noticed walking through the lobby was not the architecture. It was the people. He noticed the server near the entrance, a young Latino man, maybe 19, struggling to balance a tray of champagne flutes while simultaneously holding a clipboard and trying to check invitations. The kid was doing 3 jobs at once and doing all of them adequately, which was a minor miracle. Daniel stepped over, without announcement, took the clipboard from him, found his own name, checked himself in, and handed it back. "Thank you," the young man breathed, like he'd been handed something precious. "You really didn't have to." "I know," Daniel said. "Go." He moved into the main ballroom. It was already dense with people, the kind of crowd that generated its own gravity clusters of wealth and influence, orbiting each other in slow, deliberate patterns. Servers moved through the crowd like water, finding its way through stone. Music played from a string quartet in the far corner, something classical, polished, appropriate. Daniel got a glass of water and stood near the edge of the room and watched. He watched a senior executive berate a young female server for delivering the wrong appetizer, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. He watched the server absorb it without expression, replace the appetizer, and move on. He watched a man in a bespoke suit pocket a business card from someone, then visibly downgrade his level of attention the moment the person turned away. He watched a small group of men in the far corner look at him when he entered, a quick assessing glance that lasted half a second longer than courtesy required, and then returned to their conversation. He had seen that glance 10,000 times. He was used to it. But tonight, something was already different. He could feel it. He couldn't have named exactly what it was, just a quality in the room, a specific kind of tension. Like the ballroom knew something was about to happen. He got a second glass of water and waited. Her name was Sophia Bennett, and she was the only person in the room who looked like she was simultaneously doing 6 things and was in complete control of all of them. He noticed her because she was moving differently than everyone else. Not drifting through the social choreography of the gala, but cutting through it purposeful, with a small earpiece in her left ear and a tablet in her hand, and the focused expression of someone who was responsible for the fact that this evening actually functioned. She nearly walked directly into him. "I'm so sorry." "My fault," Daniel said, stepping sideways. She glanced at him. Really glanced, the kind where you actually look at a person rather than through them, and for a half-second, her professional momentum paused. "You're not supposed to be in this section yet," she said. "The main reception doesn't open for—" She checked her tablet. 12 more minutes. "I know, I came early to watch the room settle." She looked at him again. Most people, when they said something unexpected, looked immediately guilty about it, like they'd accidentally said something embarrassing. Daniel just waited. "To watch the room settle," she repeated. "You can learn a lot about a place before the performance starts." Sophia tilted her head. "You're not what I expected from the guest list." "What did you expect?" "Somebody who'd tell me they came early because they're important, and the rules don't apply to them. That's roughly 60% of your attendees tonight." She almost laughed, then remembered she was working. "I need to get the north corridor set up." "You're welcome to." "Go," Daniel said. "I'll find my way." She studied him one more moment. Then she nodded and moved past him, efficient and unhurried, and disappeared into the crowd. Daniel watched her go. He turned back toward the ballroom. And that was when he first saw Alexander Whitmore. Alexander Whitmore entered a room the way a weather system does. You felt the air change before you saw the man. He was 61 years old, broad through the shoulders, silver-haired with the permanent tan of someone who owned properties in warm places. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and wore it with the ease of someone who had never in his life checked a price tag. He moved through the crowd like he owned not just the company, but the room, the hotel, the evening itself. People turned toward him, hands extended, smiles activated. The particular kind of performance that wealth enables, the warm, performative deference of people who need something from someone, surrounded him like a fog. Daniel watched him for 11 minutes without moving. He watched who Alexander touched on the arm and whose handshake he accepted while already looking past the person to the next more valuable target. He watched the way Alexander's smile shifted slightly warmer for men who wore better watches, slightly cooler for anyone who approached without an introduction from someone he already knew. He watched the way Alexander held his glass loosely, carelessly, the glass of a man who knew it would be refilled the moment he wanted it. He watched the way Alexander looked at the servers, through them, past them, around them, the way you look at furniture. Daniel had seen enough. The financials on Whitmore Industries were strong. The community development initiative was well structured on paper. The public relations around it was impeccable. But the man who would execute it looked at the working people in his presence the way you look at obstacles. Daniel was reconsidering, not withdrawing, not yet, but reconsidering, watching. And that was when Victoria Whitmore materialized at his elbow. She was 32 years old and had her father's certainty and her father's eyes and a manner that had been shaped by a lifetime of being told she was exceptional, not because of what she'd done, but because of where she'd been born. She was attractive in the precise, curated way of someone who treated her appearance as a professional obligation. Her dress was designer. Her jewelry was understated and real. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had never entered a room and wondered if she was welcome. She looked at Daniel, the way people look at something that's in the wrong place, not hostile exactly, but confused, puzzled, like she was trying to reconcile his presence with her understanding of how the room was organized. "This area is reserved for VIP guests." Daniel looked at her calmly. "I have an invitation." "Everyone says that." "Would you like to see it?" She didn't answer that question. She pivoted. "Are you with the catering staff, or perhaps—" "I'm a guest." The word sat between them, simple and firm. Victoria's expression shifted slightly, not embarrassment, not quite, but something adjacent to it, which she immediately covered with a practiced recovery. "Of course. My apologies. Enjoy your evening." She was already turning away when Sophia appeared beside them, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been watching the interaction from 10 feet away and had decided to insert herself. Mr. Brooks is on the primary guest list, Sophia said. Her voice was pleasant, professional, completely clear. He was personally invited by your father's office. Victoria stopped. She looked at Sophia. She looked at Daniel. Something moved across her face. Something brief and complex, and then gone, replaced by the practiced warmth of someone who'd been trained from childhood in social management. Of course. Welcome, Mr. Brooks. I hope you enjoy the evening. She moved away. Daniel watched her go. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. I know, Sophia said, not looking up from her tablet. Thank you. She glanced at him sideways. She does that to anyone who doesn't match her template, Sophia said. You'd think someone who grew up planning to run a company worth $40 billion would have learned that the person you dismiss in the lobby sometimes turns out to be... She stopped herself. Anyway. Sometimes turns out to be what? Someone important. Or, Daniel said, just someone who deserves basic decency regardless. Sophia looked at him. Really looked. Then she went back to her tablet. I need to go check the speaker system. Go. She went. Daniel turned back to the room. He had maybe 3 hours left to make his decision. The incident began 40 minutes later, and it began the way most disasters do not, with malice aforethought, but with momentum. A chain of small choices by small people. In a moment they thought nobody was recording. Daniel was standing near the far side of the room, watching a server who had been on his feet for 6 hours, manage to smile at every single person he encountered. The man's name tag read James. He was maybe 22, with the careful, practiced invisibility of someone who understood that his job required him to be present, but not seen. A tray of empty glasses slipped from a nearby cocktail table, somebody's careless elbow, and scattered across the floor. Not breaking, but scattering, rolling in 6 directions at once, and James's head snapped toward the sound with the instant practiced assessment of a man who knew immediately that this was his problem to solve, and that it needed to be solved before a guest tripped, and before a manager noticed, and before Daniel was already moving. He crossed the 12 feet between himself and the glasses, before James got there, crouched down, and began collecting them. James reached him 30 seconds later and stopped. Sir, please, you don't need to. I've got 3, Daniel said. You get the ones under the table. James stared at him for a moment. Then he crouched down and got the ones under the table. They had the tray reassembled in 90 seconds. James stood, held the tray, and looked at Daniel with an expression that was almost painful in its gratitude and confusion, the expression of someone who was not accustomed to being helped. Thank you, James said. Seriously, thank you. Do you have water? Daniel asked. You look like you've been on your feet since setup. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. James almost smiled. No, I don't really get to stop. Go get water, Daniel said. 3 minutes. Nobody is going to notice 3 minutes. My manager. I'll handle your manager. James looked at him again with that painful, grateful expression. Who are you? Daniel straightened. Nobody important. Go get some water. James went. I didn't know it yet, but Daniel had just watched him for 60 seconds and decided he was the kind of person Whitmore Industries needed more of in positions of actual responsibility, and filed that observation away. It was this moment, Daniel crouching on the marble floor collecting glasses, that Alexander Whitmore and his group chose to walk past. They saw a black man in an average suit crouching on the floor picking up glasses. They drew their conclusion. Alexander said something to the man beside him that Daniel didn't hear. The man laughed. They moved on. Daniel stood up. He watched them go. His jaw tightened once, then released. He had been here before. He would be here again. The calculation was always the same. Let it take your energy, or let it make you sharper. The second option was always better. The second option was what had built everything he had. He turned back toward the room. Sophia found him again near the bar 40 minutes later. She wasn't supposed to be stopping. He could see the tension of about 12 simultaneous responsibilities in her posture, but she stopped. You're still here, she said. It was more observation than greeting. I told you I was invited. That's not what I meant. She set her tablet down on the bar for a moment, a concession that she was pausing. Most people at these things plant themselves in the center of the room and try to be visible. You keep finding the edges. The edges are more interesting. Why? Because that's where the real information is. The center of a room like this is all performance. Everyone's performing for each other. The edges are where you see what people do when they think the performance is over. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She picked her tablet back up, but didn't move yet. You know, I've coordinated 43 events for this company and its partners over the past 4 years. I've seen every type of wealthy person this world produces. She paused. You don't act like any of them. Good. Is that intentional? Daniel looked at her. A long time ago, he said. I decided that the person I wanted to be was the person I was when I was alone with my son at the end of a long day. That's the only version of myself I care about being. Sophia looked at him carefully. You have a son. 6 years old. His name is Marcus. He can identify 14 species of birds by sound alone, and he's working on his times tables, and he thinks dinosaurs are the greatest tragedy in the history of the planet. Why didn't you bring him tonight? Because this isn't a place for him. Daniel looked at the room. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She followed his gaze across the room. You don't like it here, she said. I don't dislike the people, he said. I'm just always watching to find out which ones deserve what they have. And, jury's still out on most of them. Sophia smiled, really smiled, not the professional smile she'd been deploying all evening, and it changed her whole face. What about me? She said. You, Daniel said, are one of the only people in this room who treats the servers like human beings. That tells me a great deal. She looked almost surprised, then composed. I should get back to work. Go. She went. He saw it happening before it fully happened, that particular quality of attention that comes from spending years, watching rooms, watching people, learning to read the energy of a situation, the way a musician reads the air before a note drops. Alexander Whitmore was moving through the crowd with the specific intentionality of a man who had decided to do something, surrounded by a small constellation of associates who had the anticipatory expression of people who were about to witness something they'd been promised would be entertaining. Daniel had shifted his position twice in the past hour, always instinctively putting himself in a spot where he could see the most of the room with the least amount of exposure. He was standing near a pillar when Alexander's group materialized before him. I don't believe we've met, Alexander said. His voice was the voice of a man who had never been told no by someone he respected. Daniel looked at him. We haven't. You've been here all evening, Alexander said with the studied casualness of a man setting up a point. I'd have remembered meeting you. You were busy. Alexander smiled at the people around him. I'm sure I was. And what brings you here tonight? Business. What kind of business? Daniel met his eyes directly. Investment. Alexander's smile shifted, a micro-movement, almost imperceptible, the smile of a man recalibrating. Investment. In what capacity? In the capacity of an investor. The people around Alexander laughed. It was the laugh of a group following the leader's energy, not genuine amusement. Daniel registered it without reacting. You know what your problem is, Alexander said. His voice had dropped the casual register. He was performing now for his audience, and they both knew it. You think standing in a room full of important people makes you one of them. Daniel looked at him without expression. I don't think standing anywhere makes anyone anything, Daniel said. What a person is has nothing to do with what room they're standing in. Is that so? Respect isn't something people earn because of their position, Daniel said. It's something every person deserves. Silence. Alexander's group looked at him. Alexander looked at him. The ambient noise of the ballroom continued, oblivious, 400 people doing 400 other things. And then Alexander reached out and took a full glass of red wine from the tray of a passing server, without looking at the server, without acknowledgement, without even a moment's hesitation, and he looked at Daniel and he said, Maybe this will remind you where you belong. And he poured it. The entire glass. Slow. Deliberate. Over Daniel's head, over his face, his collar, his jacket. The people around Alexander laughed. The immediate area of the ballroom went quiet. Then the quiet spread the way. Silence does in a large room, rolling outward from the center of the incident like a wave, until 400 people were looking at the same spot. A black man, standing in wine, not moving, not speaking. Daniel felt the wine run down his face, felt it soak through the back of his collar, felt the weight of it in his jacket. He felt 400 pairs of eyes. He felt the specific quality of the attention in the room, not sympathy, not indignation, but the terrible fascinated passivity of people who are watching something happen and have decided it's not their moment to intervene. He had felt this before. Not this exactly, but this. He had been 12 years old at a science fair in Oakwood, Ohio, and a man in a navy blazer had looked through him like he was a door. He had been 19 in a bank in Columbus, trying to open a business account, while a loan officer spent 45 minutes explaining to him why young black men from East Dayton were not typically considered strong candidates. He had been 26 in a conference room at a private equity firm, the only black person in the room, and had watched a senior partner deliver his presentation proposal without attribution, and then act confused when Daniel pointed this out. He had been in this room 1,000 times, wearing 1,000 different versions of this moment. And every single time, he had made the same choice. He breathed. He looked at Alexander Whitmore. Not with rage, not with humiliation, not with the fractured, wounded expression of a man who has just been made to feel small. With pity. 7 words. I hope that made you feel important. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The laughter in Alexander's group faded. Is that supposed to scare us? Alexander said. Daniel wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at the phone. He found the contact. He pressed call. The phone rang once. Mr. Brooks. The voice on the other end was professional alert, accustomed to calls at unusual hours. Freeze the agreement with Whitmore Industries. A brief pause. All of it. Daniel looked across the ballroom. He looked at Alexander Whitmore, who was smiling at his associates, who was still performing for a room that was slowly beginning to understand something had shifted. He looked at Victoria Whitmore, who was standing 20 feet away, with an expression he couldn't quite read. He looked at Sophia Bennett, who had appeared near the edge of his sightline, with her tablet held against her chest, and an expression of quiet, careful attention. He looked at the room. 400 people. The most powerful people in the city. And he thought of Marcus, 6 years old, who could name 14 birds by their songs, who was right now asleep in Columbus with Daniel's sister, watching over him, who had never asked to be born into a world that would put him in these rooms someday, and look at him the way these people were looking at his father right now. He thought of Gloria, in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Dayton, pressing other people's clothes with cracked hands. He thought of Earl Hodges, who'd been to 3 banks and been told no by all of them. All of it, Daniel said. Confirmed. The wire transfers are paused. Documents are frozen. I'll contact legal. Thank you. He ended the call. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Sophia. Thank you, he said, for treating me like a person tonight. She opened her mouth to say something. He nodded once, and he walked out. For approximately 4 minutes, the ballroom continued as though nothing had changed. Then the changes began. The presentation screen at the front of the room flickered and went dark. A murmur went through the crowd, people assuming a technical glitch. Then a second screen went dark. Then a notification appeared on the primary display. Broadcast paused, authorization required. 3 senior executives received calls simultaneously. They stepped away from their conversations with the practiced urgency of people accustomed to emergencies. 2 of them did not come back. A woman in the signing room, a lawyer for Whitmore Industries, mid-40s, experienced unflappable, stood up from the table and said to no one in particular, "The documents have been revoked." 2 of the other lawyers looked at her. "What do you mean revoked?" "I mean the counter-signature authorization has been withdrawn. We have no deal." Victoria Whitmore's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her face changed. Alexander Whitmore's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He laughed a short, dismissive laugh. Then his phone buzzed again. Then his director of finance appeared at his elbow with an expression Alexander had never seen on the man's face before. "Alexander, we have a problem." The chairman of Whitmore Industries entered the ballroom from a side door. He was 68 years old and had been in this business for 40 years and had the face of a man who had absorbed many things, but not this. He crossed the ballroom floor toward Alexander. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at Alexander the way you look at someone who has just done something that cannot be undone. Then he spoke. "The man you just poured wine on," the chairman said, his voice very quiet, very controlled, very precisely aimed at only Alexander, "is Daniel Brooks." Alexander stared at him. His firm was the investor. $3 billion, 7-year agreement, community development. It was all him. Alexander said nothing. "He froze the deal 6 minutes ago," the chairman said. "His legal team has already contacted ours. The wire authorizations have been canceled. The partnership documents are void." Across the room, Victoria was looking at her phone with an expression that had gone very still. The orchestra began playing again. They didn't know what else to do, and the sound of strings filled the ballroom bright and cheerful and completely wrong for the moment. "Who is he?" Alexander said finally. It wasn't really a question. "He's the founder of Brooks Capital Group," the chairman said. "He's worth approximately $3.4 billion. He's been one of the most significant private investors in the Midwest for the past decade, and he has never not once given an interview or appeared in a press profile." The chairman stopped. "And he was here tonight because he wanted to meet you in person before he committed." Alexander's face had gone through several colors. "Call him." "He's gone," the chairman said. "Call his office." "I've already called his office. His team says he'll be in touch if he chooses to be." The chairman looked at Alexander with something that was not sympathy. "You need to understand what happened here tonight. That man could have had his security team involved. He could have called every financial journalist in the country. Instead, he made one phone call and walked out. Do you understand what that means?" Alexander said nothing. "It means," the chairman said, "that we will never know when or whether there is a way back from this. It means we are at his discretion, entirely." He straightened. "I'd like you to explain to me what you were thinking." Alexander opened his mouth. And for the first time in 61 years, he had nothing to say. Daniel Brooks walked out of the Grand Meridian Hotel into the cool evening air. He had wine drying on his collar. His jacket was ruined. He was 45 minutes from the hotel where he'd planned to stay tonight, and he had a 7:30 call in the morning with his legal team, and somewhere in Columbus, his 6-year-old son was asleep, probably with his Birdfield guide open on the pillow beside him. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He thought about his mother's hands cracked and bleeding in January. He thought about Earl Hodge, who'd been told no 3 times. He thought about James the server, who hadn't had water in 6 hours, who smiled at every single person who looked through him. He thought about Marcus. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to his sister. "Tell him I'll be home for breakfast. We're making waffles." He put his phone in his pocket. He started walking. Behind him, 400 of the most powerful people in the city were beginning to understand that the quiet man in the average suit had just made the most significant financial decision of the evening, and it had taken him exactly 7 seconds and a single phone call. He didn't look back. He never looked back. That was something his mother had taught him a long time ago in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Dayton, Ohio. Don't let it make you small. He hadn't. He wouldn't. The call came at 4:47 in the morning. Alexander Whitmore had not slept. He was sitting in the back of his car in the parking structure beneath the Grand Meridian, had been sitting there since midnight, because going home meant walking into a house where there were no answers, and staying in the car meant he could pretend he was still in the process of doing something about what had happened. His tie was loose. His jacket was folded over the passenger seat. He had made 14 phone calls in the past 4 hours and received 14 versions of the same information, delivered in 14 different tones, ranging from careful professional neutrality to barely concealed panic. Daniel Brooks, founder of Brooks Capital Group, private investor. Net worth estimated at $3.4 billion. No media presence. No press profile. 17 years of strategic investment in undervalued businesses across the American Midwest. A man who had built one of the most quietly powerful investment firms in the country in complete deliberate obscurity. A man who had been standing in Alexander's own event all evening, and whom Alexander had looked at and seen nothing worth his attention. His phone lit up. The name on the screen was Richard Hale, the chairman of Whitmore Industries, a man who had been in business for 40 years and who had exactly one tone when things were genuinely serious, and that tone was what Alexander heard the moment he answered. "I need you in my office at 7. "Richard, it's 5 in the morning. 6:55. Don't be late." The call ended. Alexander stared at his phone. In 31 years of running Whitmore Industries, Richard Hale had never summoned him. They were equals, had been equals technically since Alexander had taken over from his father 20 years ago. They played golf. They had dinner with their wives. They disagreed in boardrooms with the comfortable ease of men who understood each other's limits. Richard Hale did not summon him. Until now. He sat in the car for another 10 minutes. Then he straightened his tie, put on his jacket, and started the engine. The Whitmore Industries headquarters was on the 34th floor of a glass tower downtown, and at 6 in the morning, it had the specific uncomfortable atmosphere of a building that was usually empty at this hour, but wasn't today. There were lights on in offices that shouldn't have lights on. There were people at desks who shouldn't be at desks yet. As Alexander rode the elevator up, he passed 3 floors where he could see through the glass walls clusters of people in various states of urgency: lawyers, financial analysts, the director of investor relations, the head of communications, all of them moving with the particular velocity of people managing a crisis. Nobody looked at him as he walked to Richard Hale's office. That, more than anything, told him something. Richard was standing at the window when Alexander came in, looking out at the city beginning to lighten. He didn't turn around immediately. He let Alexander stand there for a moment, which was not something Richard had ever done before, and which communicated clearly and without words that the geometry of their relationship had changed overnight. "Close the door." Alexander closed the door. Richard turned. His face was the face of a man who had been awake all night arriving at a conclusion that he didn't like, but that he had fully accepted, and who was now in the business of executing what came next. "I'm going to be direct with you," Richard said, "because we have approximately 72 hours before this becomes something we can no longer contain. The deal. Forget the deal for a moment." Richard's voice was precise, controlled, and completely without the warmth that characterized their usual conversations. "I want you to tell me what you were thinking." Alexander opened his mouth. "Don't manage me," Richard said. "Don't give me the version you've been rehearsing in the car for the past 2 hours. Tell me what you were actually thinking when you poured that wine." A long silence. Alexander sat down, which he hadn't been invited to do. He sat down because his legs felt strange. "I didn't know who he was." "That is abundantly clear," Richard said. "What I'm asking is, what made you think that mattered?" He looked like what?" Alexander stopped. Richard watched him. "He looked like he didn't belong there," Alexander said finally. The words landed in the room and sat there. Richard said nothing for a moment. "Here is where we are," Richard said. Brooks Capital Group had committed $3.1 billion in structured investment over a 7-year period to our community development initiative. That investment represented the cornerstone of our Q1 announcement. Every other investor in the consortium, 11 additional partners, totaling another $4.7 billion, joined this initiative specifically because Brooks was leading it. His participation was the signal that the project was serious. Without him, the consortium loses its anchor. Richard paused. "Our legal team has been in contact with his firm since 2 in the morning. His team has been professional, prompt, and said absolutely nothing of substance, which means Daniel Brooks has not yet decided what he wants to do. Then we can fix this." Richard looked at him. "Can we? If I reach out personally? If I apologize?" "Alex." Richard's voice dropped into something quieter, and somehow that was worse than the controlled precision of a moment ago. I have been in this business for 40 years. I have seen deals collapse for 100 reasons. Market conditions, regulatory changes, fraud, bad timing, acts of God. I have seen things I was certain were over come back, and I have seen things I was certain were solid dissolve overnight. He stopped. In 40 years, I have never seen a deal collapse because a CEO poured wine on the lead investor at his own gala. Silence. This isn't just a deal, Richard said. This is a statement about the character of this company. And right now, the statement that was made in front of 400 witnesses in a ballroom full of the most connected people in this city is that Alexander Whitmore looked at a black man in an average suit and decided he was beneath contempt. He let that sit. That is the story. Whether it goes public or not, that is the story that 400 people are telling each other right now. Alexander stared at the floor. So here is what is going to happen, Richard said. You are going to stay away from any communication with Brooks Capital Group. You will not call, you will not email, you will not send an intermediary without my explicit approval. The communications team is already managing the public-facing narrative. Legal is exploring our options. He walked to his desk and sat down. And I am going to make a personal call this morning to Daniel Brooks, not to beg, because you cannot beg a man like that, and not to negotiate because we are in no position to negotiate, but to convey the sincere apology that should have come from you last night, at the moment it happened in front of every person in that room. Richard. I am not finished. Richard's eyes were clear and direct. What happened last night was not a business mistake. Business mistakes I can work with. What happened last night was a revelation of character. And the question I have been sitting with since midnight, the question I suspect you haven't allowed yourself to ask, is whether the character revealed last night is the character of a man who should be running this company. The room was very quiet. Alexander heard the ventilation system. He heard the muffled sound of the city beginning outside. He heard his own breathing. He said nothing. Richard picked up his phone. You can go, he said. Not unkindly, but completely finally. Alexander stood. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. Do you think he'll listen? Richard looked at him. I think Daniel Brooks is a man who built $3.4 billion out of nothing by making very careful decisions about who deserves his trust, Richard said. I think last night you answered every question he might have had about this company's character in about 30 seconds. He looked back at his desk. Whether he listens to me is entirely his decision, as it should be. Alexander opened the door and walked out. Daniel had made waffles. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table in his dinosaur pajamas, the ones with the small green brachiosauruses running across the fabric, working very seriously on his second waffle, while his father stood at the counter with a coffee cup and watched him with the specific, sustained attention of a man who had spent the previous night in a room full of 400 people and had been reminded once again what actually mattered. Dad? Yeah. Do you think if a Triceratops and a Stegosaurus got in a fight, who would win? What are the conditions? Marcus considered this with genuine seriousness. Open field. Both of them are fully grown. No running away. Stegosaurus, Daniel said. The tail spikes. The Triceratops' horns are better for charging, but the Stegosaurus doesn't need to charge. It just needs to turn. Marcus processed this. But the Triceratops has a frill, for protection. Frills mostly display. It's not armor. Marcus pointed at his father with his fork, which was the gesture he used when he was about to make a point he found compelling. But display is important. Mrs. Kellerman says that in nature looking powerful is sometimes the same as being powerful. Daniel looked at his son. Mrs. Kellerman is smart, he said. But looking powerful and being powerful are not the same thing. Sometimes people who need to look powerful are the ones who know they're not. Marcus thought about this. Like the kids at school who brag the most about stuff. Exactly like that. Marcus returned to his waffle. Dad, you have something on your collar. Daniel touched the back of his neck. The wine had dried overnight into a faint dark stain that his jacket collar had partially hidden, but that his dress shirt's collar bore clearly. I know. What is it? Red wine. How did red wine get on your collar? Someone spilled it on me. Marcus looked up from his waffle with the clear, uncomplicated moral assessment of a 6-year-old. That's rude. It was. Did you tell them it was rude? Daniel thought about 7 words delivered quietly to a man holding an empty crystal glass in a silent ballroom. Something like that. Marcus returned to his waffle, satisfied with this answer. Daniel drank his coffee. His phone, face down on the counter, had been buzzing intermittently since 6 in the morning. He knew without looking what the calls were. He'd checked them when Marcus was at school. He'd sit down with his legal team at 11. He'd make his decisions carefully, as he always made decisions, not in the immediate heat of a moment, not driven by anger or wounded pride, but from the position of someone who had all the information and all the time, and who understood that the most powerful move was usually the one that didn't look powerful at all. Dad? Yeah. Are you okay? Daniel looked at his son. 6-year-old waffle syrup at the corner of his mouth field, guide to North American birds on the chair beside him, because he never went anywhere without it. Watching his father with Alicia's eyes, that particular quality of attention that Alicia had possessed, the ability to look at someone and actually see them. I'm good, buddy. You look like you're thinking very hard about something. I'm thinking about you eating your waffle. That's not what your face looks like. Daniel put his coffee cup down and sat across from his son at the kitchen table, which had 3 mismatched chairs and a surface that bore the accumulated evidence of 6 years of projects and homework, and Saturday morning breakfasts, and which was the most important piece of furniture he owned. Somebody was not very kind to me last night, Daniel said, and I had to make a decision about what to do about it. And now I'm deciding if I made the right decision. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. What did you do? I walked away. And is that the right decision? That's what I'm still figuring out. Marcus put his fork down. He looked at his father with the full, undivided seriousness that children deploy when they have decided something is important. Grandma Gloria says, Marcus began with the particular authority of someone quoting scripture, that walking away from someone who's mean to you isn't giving up. It's deciding your time is worth more than their meanness. Daniel stared at his son. When did Grandma Gloria say that to you? When Kyle Henderson pushed me at recess, and I didn't push him back. She told me on the phone. Your grandmother is very wise. I know, Marcus said, and picked up his fork again. She also says you should always eat breakfast before you make big decisions. Daniel looked down at his empty hands and his empty plate. She's right about that too. He got up and made himself a waffle. Richard Hale called at 11:23 in the morning. Daniel was in his home office by then, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, 2 legal pads covered in notes on the desk in front of him. His lead attorney, Patricia Wong, was on the conference line from their Columbus office. His chief financial officer, Andre Mitchell, was on from Chicago. His phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize, which was unusual, because almost no one had this number. I need to take this, Daniel said. Hold, he answered. Mr. Brooks. The voice was older, measured with the particular quality of a man accustomed to being listened to, who was choosing in this moment to be careful. My name is Richard Hale. I'm the chairman of Whitmore Industries. I apologize for calling this number. Your assistant provided it after some convincing. She shouldn't have. I'll accept that, Richard said. I want to be honest with you about why I'm calling. Not to negotiate. Not to make excuses. I'm calling because what happened last night was wrong. And because I've been in this business long enough to know that some things can't wait for a press statement or a legal response. Some things require a person to pick up a phone. Daniel said nothing. What Alexander did, Richard continued, was indefensible. I won't try to defend it. I won't suggest it was a misunderstanding, or that he didn't know who you were, as though that would make it acceptable if he hadn't. A man poured wine on another man in front of 400 people. And the reason he did it had nothing to do with anything you had done, and everything to do with what he assumed when he looked at you. That is a failure of character. And it is a failure that I take seriously. A long silence. Mr. Hale, Daniel said finally, please, I appreciate the call. I genuinely do. And I want to be straightforward with you the way you've been with me. He paused. My decision last night wasn't made in anger. I was not acting emotionally. I've been in rooms like that my entire life, and I learned a long time ago not to make decisions from emotion in those rooms, because that's exactly what those rooms want you to do. Another pause. My decision was based on information. All evening I was watching the people in that room, because that's how I make investment decisions. I don't just read the financials. I watch the character. I watch how people treat the people around them who have nothing to offer them. Because that is the most honest data available. And what did you see? I saw a man, Daniel said, who looked at every working person in that ballroom and saw furniture, who looked at me and made a calculation based on my appearance and my suit and my color, and decided I was beneath the dignity of basic courtesy, and then acted on that calculation in the most public way possible. He stopped. That is the man who would be executing a 7-year community development initiative in neighborhoods where people look like me and like James the server, and like the young man at the front door who was doing 3 jobs at once because nobody had thought to hire adequate staff. Richard was quiet. I understand, he said. I don't think you need me to tell you what conclusion I drew from that data. No, Richard said. I don't. Another long silence. I'm not closing the door permanently, Daniel said, and he could hear the precise, careful attention on the other end of the line sharpen at those words. But I'm not opening it today either. The communities this initiative was supposed to serve deserved better leadership than what was on display last night. If that leadership changes, genuinely changes not for public relations purposes, then I'm willing to have a conversation. One conversation, no commitments. That's more than fair, Richard said. It's not forgiveness, Daniel said. I want to be clear about that. It's an acknowledgement that the idea had merit, and that the people it was supposed to help didn't do anything wrong last night. I understand the distinction. Good. Daniel looked at his legal pads. Have your team send a revised proposal, but not until after you've had the internal conversations that I imagine need to happen first. I'll know if the proposal was written before or after those conversations. I always know. Richard was quiet for a moment. How will you know? Because a proposal written before the hard internal conversation is written to persuade me, Daniel said. A proposal written after it is written to reflect what the company actually decided. They read completely differently. A longer silence. You're a remarkable businessman, Mr. Brooks. I'm a man who learned to pay attention, Daniel said. Good morning, Mr. Hale. He ended the call. He put the phone down. On the conference line, Patricia was quiet for a moment. That was well handled. Get me everything we have on the Community Development Initiative, Daniel said. Every document, every public statement. I want to build a parallel analysis of what the program could actually deliver under different leadership structures. Different leadership meaning not Alexander Whitmore anywhere near the operational chain. Andre spoke up from Chicago. You're still considering it. Daniel looked out the window at the backyard where Marcus had left his soccer ball and one dinosaur figurine in the grass that morning. The communities that initiative would affect have been waiting a long time for this kind of investment, Daniel said. What happened to me last night matters. It matters significantly, but it does not matter more than the people in those neighborhoods. My wounded pride is not worth more than their housing and their jobs and their economic future. He picked up his pen. So yes, I'm still considering it, but on different terms, completely different terms. The line was quiet. You know, Patricia said carefully, most people in your position last night would have walked away and never looked back. Most people in my position last night, Daniel said, haven't spent their career watching what happens to communities when the money walks away and doesn't come back. He looked at his notes. Let's get to work. By 2 that afternoon, the story had reached the edges of the financial press, not the full story. Daniel had made no calls to journalists, had issued no statement, had spoken to no one outside his legal team and Richard Hale. But 400 people had been in that ballroom, and 400 people had phones, and the information that something significant had happened to the Whitmore Industries investment deal, that a $3 billion agreement had collapsed on the night it was supposed to be finalized, was the kind of information that traveled fast in certain circles. 2 financial journalists called Daniel's office. His assistant Clara told them both the same thing. Mr. Brooks had no comment at this time. A third journalist, a woman named Dana Park, who wrote for a business publication that Daniel had quietly respected for years because of its actual reporting standards, sent a text directly to his cell phone, which was the second time that day someone had reached a number they shouldn't have had. The text said only, "I know what happened last night. I'm not going to write about it without talking to you first. I'll wait." Daniel stared at that text for a long time. He typed back, "Give me a few days." Dana Park responded immediately, "Take the time you need." He put his phone down. He thought about Marcus's fork pointed at him across the breakfast table. Looking powerful and being powerful are not the same thing. The child had distilled in 10 words, something it had taken Daniel 34 years to fully understand. He thought about how Alicia would have loved that moment. She would have laughed and then immediately written it down in the notebook she kept for the things Marcus said that were too good to lose. The notebook that now sat in the top drawer of Daniel's desk because he couldn't put it anywhere else and couldn't bring himself to open it very often. He opened it now. He hadn't opened it in 3 months. He found the last entry she'd made 4 days before she died in her handwriting that slanted slightly to the right and bunched the letters together like they were in a hurry. M asked, "Today why some people are mean." I told him because they're scared. He asked what they're scared of. I said probably of not being enough. He thought about it for a long time and then said, "That's sad." He's right. It is sad. Daniel sat with that for a long time. Then he closed the notebook. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. Gloria Brooks answered on the second ring, which she always did, because she kept her phone on her person at all times, and had since the year Daniel's father left, and she had become the only person her son could call. "Baby." "Hey, Mom. You sound tired." "I'm okay." "How's Marcus?" "He's good. He's at school. He told me this morning that Stegosaurus would beat Triceratops in a fight." "Is he right?" "Probably." A pause on the line. Gloria had always been able to hear through his voice to whatever was underneath it, had been doing it since he was 12 years old and came home from the science fair. Not crying, but not quite, not crying either. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything, not the business details, but the essential story. The room, the evening, the man with the wine glass, the 7 words, the phone call, the walk out into the cool evening air, with wine drying on his collar. When he finished, Gloria was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Are you actually okay? Or are you telling me you're okay?" "Both." "Daniel." "Mom, I'm okay. It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last time, and I handled it the way you taught me to handle it." "Which way is that?" "I let it make me hungry instead of small." A long pause. When Gloria spoke again, her voice had the particular texture it got when she was holding something together. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever you decide to do about the business side of it, I don't care about that. I care that you walked out of that room with your head up." "I did." "Good." A breath. "Now, have you eaten?" "I had a waffle." "At 7 in the morning, it's 2 in the afternoon." "Mom, I know you, Daniel. You have been in that office since Marcus left for school, and you have been on calls and making notes and thinking about everybody in those communities and what they need and whether the initiative can still work, and you have not eaten a real meal." He looked at his desk, at his 2 legal pads full of notes, at the coffee cup that had been empty for 40 minutes. "I'll order something." "You'll order something, and then you'll forget to eat it while it sits in the bag," Gloria said. "Take a break. Go outside for 10 minutes. The answers will still be there when you come back." "Okay." "I love you." "I love you too, Mom." He put the phone down. He looked at the desk, at the notebook, at the window where the soccer ball was still in the yard and the dinosaur figurine had been there all day. He stood up. He went outside. He stood in the yard in the afternoon light in his rolled-up shirt sleeves with his hands in his pockets, and he breathed. He looked at the fence at the old oak in the back corner at the bird feeder Marcus had insisted on installing last spring, and which had been visited by Marcus had informed him with complete confidence 14 distinct species since April. A cardinal landed on the feeder, red and bright and entirely unconcerned with anything. Daniel watched it. He thought about the night before. He thought about Alexander Whitmore and the wine glass and the silence of 400 people. He thought about James the server, who hadn't had water in 6 hours and who had smiled at everyone anyway. He thought about what Richard Hale had said. Some things require a person to pick up a phone. He thought about Sophia Bennett and her tablet and the way she'd stepped forward when nobody else in that room had. I thought about Marcus asleep right now in a classroom somewhere with his field guide in his backpack and his pencil moving across his math worksheet with a focus that would have made Alicia cry with pride. He thought about what he owed to himself and what he owed to something larger than himself, and whether those two things were in conflict, or whether if he was patient enough, careful enough, clear enough, they could point in the same direction. The cardinal flew away. He watched it go. Then he went back inside and called Patricia. "Here's what I need the proposal to include," he said. He picked up his pen. He started talking. Patricia Wong had been Daniel's lead attorney for 9 years, and in 9 years she had learned 2 things about him that most people never figured out. The first was that when Daniel Brooks went quiet on a phone call, he wasn't disengaging. He was thinking at a depth that most people couldn't sustain in conversation, processing every variable simultaneously, the way a chess player processes a board. Not the immediate move, but the consequences of the consequence of the consequence. You didn't interrupt that silence. You waited for it to end, and when it ended, what came out was always worth the wait. The second thing she had learned was that when Daniel Brooks said, "Here's what I need the proposal to include," what followed was not a list. It was a philosophy. And a philosophy took longer to write down than a list, and it demanded more of the people executing it. And it was always, without exception, the right approach. She had 3 legal pads in front of her by the time he finished talking. Leadership restructuring as a condition of investment. She repeated, reading back from her notes. Mandatory community advisory board with actual veto authority over program decisions. Independent third-party auditing on a quarterly basis, not annual. Hiring benchmarks tied to the communities being served with financial penalties for non-compliance rather than just reporting requirements. And a sunset clause, Daniel added. If Whitmore Industries fails to meet the benchmarks in years 1 or 2, the entire structure dissolves and the remaining committed capital redirects to a community foundation I'll establish independently. Patricia was quiet for a moment. They won't like the sunset clause. They don't have to like it. Alexander Whitmore specifically. Alexander Whitmore will not be in the room when these terms are discussed. Another pause. You're serious about the leadership restructuring. I've never been more serious about anything in a business context in my life, Daniel said. The communities this initiative would serve have seen 100 versions of this same story. Well-funded program, impressive announcement pictures at a gala, and then 3 years in the money is still technically moving, but the decision-making has drifted back to people who live 45 minutes away from the neighborhoods they're supposed to be serving, and who have never once had to explain a broken promise to a family whose kids are still in the same failing school. He stopped. I'm not putting my name or my capital on another version of that story. Understood, Patricia said. And she meant it, which was one of the reasons he'd trusted her for 9 years. I want the first draft by Friday, Daniel said. Not for Whitmore, for my own review. I need to be certain every line of it is something I believe before anyone else sees it. Friday. He ended the call. He looked at Alicia's notebook still on the corner of the desk where he'd left it after going outside. He didn't open it again. But he didn't put it away either. Victoria Whitmore had always believed that every problem had a solution if you were smart enough to find the angle. This was not arrogance exactly, or at least it hadn't started as arrogance. It had started as survival. Growing up in the Whitmore household meant growing up in the shadow of a man who treated competence as the minimum and excellence as the baseline expectation, and who communicated disappointment with the particular efficiency of someone who never raised his voice because he didn't need to. Alexander Whitmore's disapproval was delivered quietly, precisely, and in complete sentences, and it landed with more force than shouting. Victoria had learned young to solve problems before her father saw them. She had learned to identify angles, find leverage, manage outcomes. She had graduated from Georgetown, earned her MBA from Columbia, had spent 4 years at a top-tier consulting firm before coming back to Whitmore Industries, and at every stage of her life, she had operated on the principle that intelligence, plus preparation, plus the willingness to move fast, was sufficient to handle anything. She was discovering at 32 years old that she had been wrong. She was sitting in her apartment at 7 in the morning. She had not gone home until nearly 3 had been in the office dealing with the immediate fallout, until her body simply refused to continue looking at her laptop and at the notes she'd been making since 5, and she was confronting the fact that there was no angle here. There was no lever to pull. There was no version of smart and fast that fixed what her father had done in 30 seconds in that ballroom. Her phone rang. It was her college roommate Claire, who worked in communications at a company in New York and who had apparently seen something circulating in her professional networks. "Vic, what happened last night?" "It's complicated. The number I'm hearing, and this is just rumor at this point, nobody's confirmed anything, is that a $3 billion deal fell apart at your gala. Is that real?" "I can't discuss." "Victoria." Claire's voice dropped. "I'm not calling as a journalist. I'm calling as your friend. Are you okay?" Victoria looked at her notes, at the name she'd written at the top of the page an hour ago, and had been unable to move past. Daniel Brooks. She had spent 3 hours last night reading everything available about him, which was almost nothing. A handful of business registry filings, a brief mention in a local Dayton news piece from 12 years ago about community investment, 2 references in other companies' press materials as a private investor whose participation had been noted. No interviews, no profile pieces, no Forbes list, no LinkedIn, no social media of any kind. A man who had built $3.4 billion in complete intentional invisibility. And her father had poured wine on him. "I'm okay," she told Claire. "You don't sound okay." "I made a mistake last night too," Victoria said. "Not the one my father made, but mine." A pause. "What did you do?" Victoria thought about the VIP section. About the calm man in the dark suit who had said I was invited with such simple, steady certainty that she had felt even in the moment that she was the one who had misread the situation. She'd known it even then, and she had covered the feeling with professional recovery and moved on and told herself it didn't matter. "I looked at someone," she said, "and decided who he was before I knew anything about him." Claire was quiet. "And you were wrong. Spectacularly." "That's fixable, Vic." "Is it?" "Mistakes of assumption are fixable. Mistakes of character." Claire paused carefully. "Those are harder. But what you're describing sounds like assumption." Victoria looked at her notes, at the name at the top. "I need to think," she said. "I'll call you later." She put the phone down. She looked at the name for a long time. Then she started writing something different. Not notes, not a business strategy. Something she hadn't written since she was 24 years old, and had made a serious error in a client presentation at the consulting firm, and her mentor had told her, "Before you fix the professional problem, you have to be honest with yourself about the human one." She started writing a letter. Not to send. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she wrote it. Sophia Bennett heard about the financial fallout at 8:30 in the morning from her supervisor, the director of events at Grand Meridian, who delivered the information with the slightly stunned expression of someone reporting something they still hadn't fully processed. "The $3 billion deal that was supposed to sign here last night. It's gone. The whole thing collapsed." Sophia was in the middle of reviewing the post-event breakdown report, the kind of document that cataloged every logistical element of the previous night's gala, what had worked, what hadn't, where the costs had run over. She had been filling in a section about the sound system when her supervisor appeared. "I know," Sophia said. Her supervisor looked at her. "You know. I was there when it happened." "You were Sophia, why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't my place to report it last night, and because I didn't have all the information, and because I was trying to finish closing the event." She set her pen down. "What I know is what I saw. I'll give you a full account." She gave it, cleanly, chronologically, without editorializing, though the effort of not editorializing cost her something. She described the VIP section conversation. She described Alexander's approach. She described the wine. She described what Daniel had done and said, and then the call, and then his exit. She described the subsequent collapse of the presentation systems, and the departure of the legal teams, and the panic that had moved through the ballroom like a cold front. Her supervisor listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, he sat down. He poured wine on the lead investor. Yes. In front of 400 people. Yes. And the investor walked out and canceled the deal. Yes. Her supervisor put his face in his hands for a moment. Then he took his hands away. The hotel is going to receive inquiries about this, he said. From journalists from the Whitmore communications team, possibly from others. I need you to be prepared to be interviewed by our legal team this week. Whatever you saw, whatever you heard, they'll want it documented. I understand. Are you okay? Sophia looked at her breakdown report, at the sound system notes. I keep thinking about what he said when he left, she said. Who? Daniel Brooks. She paused. He looked at me and said thank you for treating me like a person tonight. And then he left. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did my job. And he thanked me for it like it was something rare. Her supervisor said nothing. That says something, Sophia said. About the room, about the evening, about what kind of environment we're in the business of hosting, and whether we have any responsibility for that. She looked at him directly. I'm not saying the hotel is at fault for what Alexander Whitmore did. But I am saying that man spent an entire evening in a room full of powerful people who looked through him, and the only thing he thanked anyone for was being treated like a human being. A long silence. I'll make sure legal has your full account, her supervisor said finally. She nodded. He left. She sat there for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and sent a text to a number she had found in the event's official guest correspondence file, a general contact number for Brooks Capital Group's administrative office. This is Sophia Bennett, event coordinator at the Grand Meridian. I want to make sure you're aware that the hotel has your contact information in our records only for logistical purposes related to last night. If there is anything the hotel can provide, documentation, witness accounts, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm sorry for what happened here. She sent it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went back to the breakdown report. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Ms. Bennett, thank you. We appreciate the gesture. Clara Webb, office of Daniel Brooks. Sophia read it twice. She put her phone down. She finished the breakdown report. Marcus got home from school at 3:15, which Daniel knew because he heard the specific sound of the front door. Marcus had a way of entering spaces with his whole body. Not cautiously, the way of a child who had been raised in a house that was safe, and then the sound of his backpack hitting the hallway floor with a volume that suggested he'd somehow acquired additional items during the school day. Dad. In here. Marcus appeared in the doorway of the office, backpack, abandoned jacket, half unzipped, with the particular expression of someone carrying news. Something happened at school. Daniel looked up from his legal pad. Good something or bad something? Interesting something. Tell me. Marcus came into the office and sat down in the chair across the desk, the chair Daniel usually used for calls when he didn't want to pace, and settled into it with a seriousness that was very slightly larger than his body. Kyle Henderson said his dad said something bad happened at a fancy party last night. Daniel was very still. What did his dad say? He said a rich man got embarrassed in front of a whole bunch of people. Marcus's eyes were steady. Kyle said it was funny. What did you say? I said getting embarrassed isn't funny. I said that's the kind of thing you say when you don't understand what it feels like to be embarrassed. And Kyle said I was being weird. Marcus paused. And then I said that his dad probably didn't know the whole story anyway, and Kyle got mad and walked away. Daniel looked at his son. That was very mature of you. Mrs. Kellerman says you should always consider that people might not have all the information before you decide what they did was funny. His eyes. Was it you? A beat. Was what me? The man who got embarrassed at the fancy party. Daniel held his son's gaze. He had a brief practiced impulse to deflect, to say something vague and parental that would redirect the conversation without lying. He recognized the impulse and set it aside because he had made a decision a long time ago that he was never going to lie to Marcus about anything that mattered. About the small things, the existence of the tooth fairy, which Marcus had maintained for 2 extra years, with a kind of courteous cooperative belief that suggested he'd figured it out, but appreciated the tradition. Those were different. But about things that mattered, Daniel had decided a long time ago that his son deserved truth. Yes. Marcus was quiet. What happened? A man at a party decided based on what I looked like that I didn't belong there. And then he did something unkind to make sure I understood that was what he thought. What did he do? He poured wine on me. Marcus's face moved through several expressions very quickly. Surprise, then something that was almost anger, then something more complicated and sad. Like on purpose. Yes. In front of people. In front of a lot of people. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Were you scared? No. Were you sad? Daniel thought about it honestly, the way Marcus's questions always required him to think honestly. In the moment I was steady. I've been in situations like that before. Not exactly like that, but similar enough that I knew what to do. What did you do? I told him I hoped it made him feel important, and then I walked away. Marcus considered this for a long moment. Did it what? Make him feel important? Daniel looked at his son. No, he said. I don't think it did. Marcus nodded slowly. Because, Marcus said with the careful delivery of someone working something out as they spoke, doing something mean to someone only feels good for a really short time, and then after that it doesn't feel like anything except the thing you did. Daniel stared at him. 6 years old. Where did you get that from? I thought of it, Marcus said, slightly defensive. Is it right? It's exactly right. Marcus seemed to accept this with modest satisfaction. Are you sad now? No, Daniel said, and this time he didn't need to think about it. I'm clear. Being sad and being clear are different things. Sad stays. Clear moves. What are you clear about? That some decisions I made last night were right, and that some work I have to do now is important. He looked at Marcus. And that coming home to have waffles with you this morning was the best part of my day. Marcus considered this. The waffles were pretty good, he conceded. They were excellent. Marcus stood up from the chair with the instinctive restlessness of a 6-year-old who had been sitting still for longer than biology allowed. Dad. Yeah. The man who poured wine on you. Yeah. Is he sorry? Daniel thought about Richard Hale's phone call. About the specific careful quality of the chairman's voice when he'd said indefensible, not a word chosen for effect, but a word chosen because it was accurate, and because accuracy was the only thing available. Some people around him are sorry, Daniel said. Whether he is, I think he's more frightened than sorry right now. Being frightened and being sorry are different too. And they turn into each other. Sometimes, Daniel said, if a person is willing to do the work. Marcus absorbed this. Okay. He said the word that Marcus used to signal that a significant conversation had reached its natural end, and he was ready to return to the ordinary business of being 6. Go change out of your school clothes. Marcus disappeared into the hallway. Daniel heard him take the stairs 2 at a time. He turned back to his legal pads. He picked up his pen. He wrote one line at the top of a fresh page, and it was not a business term, or a legal condition, or a financial benchmark. It was something Marcus had said. Sad stays. Clear moves. He underlined it. Then he started writing. The news broke on Thursday morning. Not the full story. Dana Park had kept her word, had waited, had not published anything. But a financial wire service ran a brief item. Whitmore Industries confirms delays in major investment partnership. Sources cite unresolved conditions. Consortium partners reported to be reassessing participation. By noon, 3 other outlets had picked it up. By 3 in the afternoon, Whitmore Industries stock had dropped 4%. By the time the market closed, 6 of the 11 consortium partners had issued statements varying from "we are monitoring the situation" to "we are pausing our participation pending further information." Alexander Whitmore released a statement through his communications team that was 2 paragraphs of polished professional language that said nothing whatsoever while using many words to do so. It was Patricia told Daniel when she called that afternoon the statement of a man whose lawyers had written every sentence. "Are we going to respond?" she asked. "No. The press is going to. We say nothing. We don't confirm, we don't deny, we don't comment. If Dana Park calls you, tell her I'll speak with her when I'm ready and not before." "And when will you be ready?" "When the proposal is in front of me and I've made my decision." He paused. "Patricia, how many people on our team know the full story of what happened at the gala?" "You, me, Andre, and the 2 associates who handled the overnight legal work." "Keep it that way." "Understood." He hung up. Howe was at his desk. It was 4 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. Marcus was at his after-school program until 5:30, and in the quiet, Daniel was acutely aware of how much he had been holding over the past 3 days. Not weight exactly. More like pressure, the sustained pressure of making every decision carefully, while being watched, while being assessed, while having the knowledge that 400 people and an unknown number of financial journalists and all 11 of his consortium partners were in various stages of waiting to see what Daniel Brooks did next. He had been here before in a different form. When Alicia died, he had made decisions for 2 years while holding a grief that would have been understandable. Completely understandable as an excuse to slow down, to withdraw, to let someone else carry the weight for a while. Nobody would have blamed him. Everyone had in fact offered to carry it. His team, his friends, his mother, Alicia's parents, who had folded him and Marcus into their lives with a generosity that still moved him to think about. But he had kept going, because keeping going was the only version of honoring her that felt real to him. Not performing grief. Not performing recovery. Just doing the next necessary thing, and the next, and trusting that over time, the doing would become less painful. It had. This was different, but the posture was the same. He picked up the phone and called Andre. "Tell me about the consortium." Andre had spent the past 2 days quietly working his own networks, which were extensive and impeccable. 6 of the 11 have gone quiet, which means they're watching. 2 have reached out to me directly to ask what's happening. 3 haven't said anything at all, which probably means they're talking to Whitmore's team. "Who reached out to you directly?" "Foundation partners out of Minneapolis and the Chen Group from San Francisco." Daniel knew both. Foundation Partners was run by a woman named Margaret Osei, whose investment ethics he had respected for a decade. The Chen Group was family-managed, second-generation, deeply committed to the communities they served. "Call them back," Daniel said. "Not to share information, just to tell them that I'm handling this deliberately, that my decision will be made based on the best outcome for the communities the initiative was supposed to serve, and that they'll hear from me directly before any public announcement." "Got it. And the 3 who are talking to Whitmore?" "Let them talk. They'll find out what they find out." "And if Whitmore is trying to rebuild the consortium without you?" A pause. "Then he'll find out very quickly," Daniel said, "that 11 partners joined this initiative because I was leading it, and that the absence of my firm changes what the initiative actually is." Another pause. "That's not ego. That's the structure of how this was built." "I know," Andre said. "I just wanted to make sure you were clear." "I'm clear." He ended the call. Howe was still sitting at his desk when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost didn't open it. Unknown numbers had been a minor flood since the news broke, most of them journalists or associates of associates looking for information. He opened it. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Victoria Whitmore. I know you have no reason to read past this sentence, but I'm asking you to. I'm not calling on behalf of my father or the company. I'm calling on behalf of myself, which is something I should have done the night of the gala and didn't. I'd like to apologize. Not over text, I know that's insufficient. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to find the right way to do that. V. Whitmore." Daniel read it 3 times. He sat with it. I thought about what he'd said to Marcus. Being frightened and being sorry are different. Sometimes they can turn into each other if a person is willing to do the work. He typed back, "I'll be in touch, Ms. Whitmore." He put the phone down. He looked at the window. He thought about the cardinal that had landed on the feeder 2 days ago, read and unconcerned, visiting briefly, and then gone. I thought about Sophia Bennett saying thank you for treating me like a person tonight. No, that was him saying it to her. He thought about how strange it was that in a room of 400 powerful people, the two interactions he kept returning to were a woman doing her job with integrity and a young server named James who hadn't had water in 6 hours. He thought about what his mother had said about breakfast and decisions. He thought about what Marcus had said about sadness and clarity. He thought about what Alicia had written in the notebook. That's sad. He's right. It is sad. And he thought about the communities. The real ones. The ones that weren't in this story as characters but as the reason the story mattered at all. The families in the Midwest cities where this initiative was supposed to direct investment. The people who had been promised things before and watched the promises dissolve, who had learned to wait with a particular kind of measured self-protective hope that was not quite hope and not quite cynicism, but somewhere in the long corridor between. Those people were the reason he had been in that ballroom. Not Alexander Whitmore. Not the 3 billion, not his own reputation. The people in the corridor between hope and cynicism, waiting to see which direction the door opened. That was the job. He picked up his pen. He started writing. And outside in the yard, in the late afternoon light, a bird Daniel couldn't name landed on Marcus's feeder, ate for a moment, and flew away. Patricia's draft arrived Friday morning at 6:47, which meant she had worked through the night, which was not something Daniel had asked her to do, but was completely consistent with who Patricia Wong was when she believed in what she was building. He read it at the kitchen table, while Marcus ate cereal and studied his field guide with the focused intensity of someone preparing for an examination nobody had scheduled. The draft was 41 pages. It was, in Daniel's considered opinion, the most precise piece of legal architecture he had ever read. Every condition he had outlined in their call was there. But Patricia had done something beyond transcription. She had stress-tested every term, identified every loophole. A hostile party might exploit, and closed each one with language, so clear it left no interpretive room whatsoever. The leadership restructuring requirement was specific down to the title level. The Community Advisory Board had not just veto authority, but defined veto procedure with timelines and binding arbitration mechanisms for disputes. The quarterly auditing structure named the criteria by which auditors would be selected to ensure genuine independence. The sunset clause was 2 paragraphs that, in Daniel's estimation, were the best 2 paragraphs of contract language he had ever read. Simple. Absolute. Completely without ambiguity. "Dad, what are you reading?" Daniel looked up. "A document that a very smart woman wrote through the night." "Is it good?" "It's excellent." Marcus considered this. "Is it about the party thing?" "Yes." "Are you fixing it?" "I'm deciding whether it's fixable." Marcus looked at him over the field guide. "Is it?" Daniel looked back at the 41 pages. "The idea behind it is fixable," he said. Whether the people behind it are fixable is a different question. Marcus absorbed this with the patient seriousness that Daniel had come to understand was his son's particular gift, the ability to hold complex information without needing it to resolve immediately. "Grandma Gloria says people can change," Marcus said, "but only if they want to, more than they want to stay the same." Daniel looked at his son for a moment. "She said that to you?" "On the phone. When I asked her about Kyle Henderson." "Marcus, how many philosophical conversations have you been having with your grandmother without telling me?" "She calls every Sunday," Marcus said, completely matter of fact. "We talk about stuff." Daniel looked at the 41 pages. He looked at his son. He thought about Gloria Brooks pressing other people's clothes in Dayton, Ohio, and calling her grandson every Sunday to talk about stuff, and how the thread of everything he had built ran directly from her cracked hands in January, through his science fair project, through 47 investment decisions, through a ballroom in the Grand Meridian Hotel, and landed here at this kitchen table, in these 41 pages, in this child, who quoted her like scripture. "Finish your cereal," Daniel said. "I'm done. You have 3 bites left." Marcus looked at the bowl. He ate the 3 bites. He took the bowl to the sink, rinsed it without being asked, which was a habit Daniel had been reinforcing for 2 years and which had finally apparently become automatic. "Dad." "Yeah." "Whatever you decide, it'll be the right thing." Daniel looked at him. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do," Marcus said simply. "Because you always think about other people first. So whatever you decide, it won't just be about you." He picked up his backpack and went to put on his shoes, leaving Daniel alone at the kitchen table with 41 pages and the complete uncomplicated confidence of a 6-year-old who had not yet learned to doubt the people he loved. It was, Daniel thought, the most useful thing anyone had said to him all week. He picked up his phone and called Patricia. "It's ready," he said. "Good morning to you too." "Good morning. It's ready." A pause on her end, the pause of someone who had been awake for 36 hours and was running on professional adrenaline and possibly coffee. "You've read all 41 pages. I read them twice. The sunset clause is the best thing you've ever written." "I know," Patricia said with a quiet satisfaction that she only permitted herself when she was certain nobody powerful was listening. "What do we do with it?" "Send it to Richard Hale's office. Not to Whitmore's legal team, to Richard directly with a cover letter from my office, stating that these are the terms under which Brooks Capital Group is willing to continue the conversation, and that they are not a starting point for negotiation. They are the terms." "He'll push back. He'll push back on 2 or 3 points," Daniel said. "He's allowed to ask for clarification. He is not allowed to change the substance of the leadership restructuring clause or the community advisory board authority. Those are immovable. And if he won't accept them, then we're done, and I'll redirect the capital to the independent foundation structure we've been building in parallel." He paused. "But I don't think he'll refuse. Richard Hale is not Alexander Whitmore. He's a man who has been in business 40 years and has not survived that long by refusing to accept the consequences of other people's mistakes." "You trust him." "I trust his pragmatism," Daniel said. "Which is a different thing. Send it today." "Sending it this morning." "Thank you, Patricia. Go sleep." "After I send it." "After you send it." He ended the call. He looked at the kitchen table at the field guide Marcus had left behind. He'd taken it to school in his backpack today, but there was a second one, a backup that lived on the kitchen chair, the way some people leave car keys. He looked at the cover, a red-tailed hawk in the upper right corner mid-flight. He thought about something. He picked up his phone and sent a text. "Ms. Whitmore, if you're available. Monday morning, 10 o'clock, my office in Columbus. Bring nothing, no lawyers, no presentation materials, just yourself." He put the phone down. He finished his coffee. 7 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "I'll be there, thank you. V. Chan." Richard Hale received the proposal at 9:47 Friday morning. He read it in his office with his door closed, which was the first sign to his assistant that whatever was in the document was not routine. Richard Hale kept his door open as a matter of professional philosophy. A closed door meant something had arrived that required more than professional attention. It required thought at a level that other people's proximity interrupted. He read it in its entirety. All 41 pages, including the footnotes which most people in his position would have delegated to their legal team. He read it himself because he had promised himself at approximately 2 in the morning, Tuesday, after the conversation with Daniel in the parking structure, that he was going to handle every element of this situation with the direct personal attention it deserved, rather than the institutional distance that was his habitual operating mode. He finished reading. He sat for a long time. Then he pressed the intercom. "Get me Hendricks," his lead attorney. "And I need you to find out where Alexander is this morning. He's in his office. Tell him to come see me at 11. He released the intercom. He looked at the proposal. He turned to the section on leadership restructuring and read it again. The language was specific. Executive oversight of the Community Development Initiative would be removed from the current CEO position and placed under an independent program director hired through a process in which the Community Advisory Board had 51% of the selection authority. The current CEO, Alexander Whitmore, though the document never used his name, referring only to the position, would have no operational involvement in program decisions. It was Richard recognized not a punitive measure. It was a structural one. It was the difference between a document that wanted to humiliate someone and a document that wanted to ensure the work actually happened correctly, regardless of who was or wasn't in the room. The distinction told him something important about Daniel Brooks. I was not doing this to destroy Alexander. He was doing this because the work mattered and the work required a different structure. The personal dimension. The wine. The ballroom. The silence of 400 people was present in every word of the document, but it was present as information rather than as anger. It had shaped the terms without controlling them. That told Richard everything he needed to know about whether this was a man he could work with. He called his attorney. "Read the whole thing," he said. "I want your assessment in 2 hours. Not line-by-line notes. I want your overall judgment. Can we live with these terms?" What's the non-negotiable? Assume all of it is non-negotiable and work from there. A pause on the attorney's end. "That's an unusual brief." "It's an unusual situation." He hung up. He looked at the closed door. I thought about Monday morning when he was going to have to go to the board and explain what had happened and what the current status of the company's most significant announced initiative was. And he thought about the fact that the story he was going to tell the board was cleaner than he had expected it to be 48 hours ago. Not clean, but cleaner, because Daniel Brooks had left a door open. I didn't have to do that. In Richard Hale's 40 years of experience, a man in Daniel's position, who had been publicly humiliated in the manner he had been publicly humiliated, had every justification to walk away and say nothing further and let the wreckage speak for itself. The financial story alone, the collapse of the Whitmore consortium, the stock drop. The partners pausing would have followed Alexander Whitmore for years without Daniel doing another single thing. Instead, Daniel had sent 41 pages of carefully constructed terms. It was Richard thought the move of a man who cared more about what the initiative could accomplish than about what the vindication of refusal would feel like. He had not encountered many people like that in 40 years of business. He was determined not to waste what was being offered. At 11 o'clock, Alexander Whitmore walked into his office. He looked like a man who had slept badly for 4 days, which was accurate. He sat down in the chair across from Richard's desk without being invited, which was his habit and which Richard let pass. "I assume you've seen the proposal," Alexander said. "I have. The leadership restructuring clause is non-negotiable." A silence. "You haven't even tried to negotiate it." "No." "Richard, he's removing me from operational oversight of a program that I built." "You built an announcement," Richard said quietly. "The program would have been built by the investment and the communities it served. Those are different things." Alexander stared at him. "I want to be very direct with you, Alex. Not as a colleague, as the person who has to take this to the board on Monday." Richard leaned forward. What happened at the gala was not a momentary lapse. A momentary lapse is forgetting someone's name, or arriving late, or saying the wrong thing in an interview. What happened was a deliberate act in front of 400 people that expressed with complete clarity what you actually think of certain people in certain situations. He paused. The board is going to hear that. The consortium partners have already heard some version of it. And Daniel Brooks, a man who has built $3.4 billion in complete privacy, who has never given an interview, who went to extraordinary lengths to keep his profile low, that man is now the subject of a story that is circulating through every financial network in this country. He didn't go to the press. He didn't need to, Richard said. There were 400 witnesses. Alexander was quiet. The terms are strict, Richard said. They are also fair. They protect the communities the initiative was supposed to serve, which was supposedly the point. They create accountability structures that frankly should have been in the original framework. He stopped. My recommendation to the board will be to accept them. And me. Richard looked at him. That conversation, he said, is a different one, and it comes after Monday. Alexander understood what that meant. He sat with it. Then he stood, and for the first time in 4 days, he looked not like a man performing confidence, but like a man who had arrived somewhere he'd been resisting, and was beginning to understand that resistance was no longer an option. "I want to apologize to him," Alexander said. "Personally. Not through a statement personally." Richard studied him. "Why?" "Because it was wrong." The words came out flat, stripped of the usual smoothness. "It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I did it, and I did it anyway. And I've been telling myself for 4 days that it was a mistake, but it wasn't a mistake. A mistake is something that happens before you understand what you're doing. I understood." He stopped. "I just didn't care. And that's different. That's worse." The office was quiet. Richard said nothing for a long moment. "Tell that to him," he said finally. "Not to me." The meeting. Monday morning was nothing like what Victoria had expected, which she recognized was her own failure of imagination. She had spent the weekend preparing not with materials, because Daniel had specifically said, "Bring nothing but internally, the way you prepare for something that matters, by trying to understand what you're actually walking into and why." She drove to Columbus herself. No driver, no assistant, no lawyer waiting in the lobby as backup. She wore something simple. She left 45 minutes early and arrived 12 minutes ahead of schedule and sat in her car outside the Brooks Capital Group, building a converted brick building in a neighborhood that was clearly in the process of careful, deliberate revitalization. And she breathed. The building looked like something that had been chosen on purpose. Not a glass tower, not a showcase. A brick building that had been well maintained and thoughtfully updated in a neighborhood that was actively becoming something, and the proximity was clearly not coincidental. She went inside. The office was not what she had expected either. She had been prepared unconsciously for the particular aesthetic of successful finance. Cool neutrals, expensive art. The kind of environment that communicated wealth through restraint. Instead, the office had the feeling of a place where actual work happened. There were real books on real shelves. There was a whiteboard near the conference area covered in writing that had not been erased for the meeting. There were photographs on the walls, not corporate photography, but what looked like candid photos from communities. People at ribbon cuttings, workers at construction sites. A group of women outside what appeared to be a reopened business, smiling with the specific joy of people who had not been certain this moment would come. Clara, Daniel's assistant, met her in the lobby. Warm, professional, and with the pleasant directness of someone who managed a significant person's time and was very good at it. "Mr. Brooks is just finishing a call. Can I get you anything?" "Water would be great, thank you." She sat in the small waiting area and looked at the photographs. She was looking at one, a group of older men outside a hardware store, a handmade sign in the window that said, "Reopened under new management," when Daniel walked in. He was in his office clothes, the same quality of suit as the gala, clean and simple, and he moved with the same quality she had registered briefly that night, purposeful but unhurried, the movement of someone who had nowhere to rush to because they'd already decided exactly what they were doing. He looked at the photograph she was looking at. "Earl Hodges," Daniel said. "Dayton, Ohio, hardware store that had been in his family for 30 years. He was about to close when we invested. That was the day he reopened." Victoria looked at the photograph, at the men's faces. "How long ago?" 11 years. He's still open. He's got 2 employees who've been with him for 8 years now." She looked at him. "Thank you for seeing me." "Come in." His office was at the back of the building. He sat behind his desk, and she sat across from it, the same configuration as the conversation she'd reviewed in her head 100 times since Tuesday, except now she was in Marcus's chair, and Daniel was exactly where he should be, and there was nothing to hide behind. "I want to apologize," she said. "I've thought a lot about how to do this correctly, and I've concluded that there isn't a correct way, so I'm just going to do it directly." She met his eyes. "What happened at the gala? What my father did was inexcusable. You know that. Everyone knows that. I'm not here to re-argue what happened." She stopped. "What I want to account for is my part," she said. "Which was smaller, but not nothing. I looked at you in the VIP section, and I made a judgment based on what you looked like and how you arrived and what I assumed about who belonged there. And I was wrong. Not just factually wrong, I was wrong in the way I was thinking, and I'm sorry for that. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer the easy grace of "it's okay," or "I understand" to shortcut past the discomfort of what she was saying. He let her say it, and then he sat with it, and she understood that this was itself a form of respect, refusing to make her apology easier than it needed to be. "I hear you," he said, "and I accept it. Not because it erases anything it doesn't, but because it's genuine, and genuine things deserve acknowledgement." She exhaled. "What I want to ask," he said, "is a harder question than the apology." "Ask it." "You're going to be running this company in 10 years. Maybe sooner, depending on what happens in the next few months." He looked at her directly. "When you are running it, not your father, not the board, acting in response to a crisis, when you are actually responsible for what this company does and how it does it, what do you intend to do differently?" The question landed exactly where she felt it. Not "how are you different from your father?" A question she could have managed with the right language. But what will you do? An action question, a commitment question, the kind that couldn't be answered with a description of values. She had not prepared an answer to this question. She had to find it in real time. "Hire differently," she said, "at every level. Not as a diversity initiative, as a basic standard that the people making decisions about communities should include people from those communities." She paused. "Compensate the community advisory board members as professionals, not as volunteers. Because unpaid advisory positions are how you get advisory boards that are ornamental. If we want real oversight, we pay for real oversight." She stopped again. "And..." She looked at the photographs on his wall, at Earl Hodges outside his hardware store. "And I want to spend time in those neighborhoods, not for announcements, not for photos, actually spending time." Daniel studied her. "That last one," he said. "Why?" "Because you can't make good decisions about people you've never been in a room with as a peer." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking about this?" "Since Tuesday morning." "And before Tuesday morning?" She met his eyes. "Before Tuesday morning," she said carefully, "I thought I understood these communities well enough from the data." He nodded, not with the particular satisfaction of a man who had made a point and was glad to see it land. With something more like recognition, the expression of a person who knew exactly what that feeling was and when it changed. "The data tells you what happened," he said. "The people tell you why, and the why is where the decision actually lives." She looked at him. Can I ask, is this part of your evaluation for the proposal?" "Everything is part of my evaluation," he said. "That's not a threat, it's just how I work." He looked at her with complete straightforwardness. "You didn't have to come here. You texted me and I gave you an opening, and you could have sent a lawyer with a letter and called it an apology. You didn't do that. That matters." "I didn't think a letter would be sufficient." "It wouldn't have been." A pause between them, not uncomfortable. "The proposal that we sent to Mr. Hale," she began. "We're not talking about the proposal today," Daniel said. "That's a separate conversation with separate people. Today is what it is." He looked at her. "You said you wanted to apologize. You've done that. And I've asked you a question that I wanted an honest answer to. You gave me one." He paused. "That's what this meeting was for." Victoria looked at him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you still considering the initiative at all?" "After what happened, you had every reason to walk away completely. You still do. Why are you still at the table?" Daniel was quiet. He looked at the photographs on his wall for a moment. "Because the people in those neighborhoods didn't pour wine on me," he said. "And the question I have to answer is not whether Alexander Whitmore deserves my investment. He doesn't. The question I have to answer is whether the communities the initiative would serve deserve to lose this opportunity because of what he did." He looked back at her. "And the answer to that question is no. They don't deserve that. They've lost too many opportunities already for reasons that had nothing to do with them." Victoria was quiet. "That's..." She stopped. "Say it." "That's a more generous framework than most people would be capable of right now." It's not generosity, Daniel said. It's clarity. Generosity is when it costs you something. This costs me nothing except having to be careful about the terms. And Patricia already handled the terms. Almost, Victoria smiled. Your attorney is remarkable. I know, Daniel said. I tell her that, and she tells me to go to sleep. For a moment, the office was quiet, in a way that was not tense, but simply present. Mr. Brooks, Victoria said. One more thing. Daniel. She paused. Daniel, I want you to know I don't expect this to become a relationship of any kind beyond professional. I'm not asking for that. But I want to be honest with you about something, and I think you're the kind of person who prefers honesty to management. I am. I've read everything available about your firm, which isn't much by design, but what I could find. She looked at him. What you've built the way you've built it, it's the kind of thing I thought I understood from business school. Return on investment risk management portfolio strategy. But what you've actually been doing is different from what those frameworks describe. She paused. It took me until Wednesday morning reading about a hardware store in Dayton that a man's family had been running for 30 years to understand that. Daniel looked at her. He said nothing. I wanted you to know, she said, that I understand it now, and that whatever happens with the proposal, whatever is decided, I'm going to carry that understanding forward, because it's better than what I had. The office was quiet. Outside somewhere a phone rang and was answered and went quiet. Daniel looked at the photographs on his wall. Earl Hodges called me last year, he said, just to talk. He does that sometimes. He called to tell me that one of the employees he hired 8 years ago, a young man from the neighborhood who had 2 prior arrests and 0 job prospects, had just bought a house 2 blocks from the store. He paused. That's the data point that doesn't fit in a spreadsheet. That's the one that tells you whether what you built was real. Victoria looked at the photograph, at the men's faces, at the handmade sign in the window. Thank you for seeing me, she said again. The words meant something different this time. Thank you for coming. She stood. He walked her to the lobby. At the door she turned. One last thing. James the server from the gala. Daniel looked at her. I found out his name from the Grand Meridian's event records. He's 22, working 2 jobs, enrolled part-time at Columbus State. She met Daniel's eyes. I've arranged for a full scholarship through the Whitmore Foundation, effective immediately with no conditions except maintaining enrollment. Daniel was still. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said. That's why I did it. She walked out. Daniel stood in the lobby and watched through the glass as she got into her car and drove away. Clara appeared at his elbow. Your 11:30 is ready. Give me 2 minutes. Clara disappeared. Daniel stood in the lobby. He thought about James, who hadn't had water in 6 hours, who was 22 and working 2 jobs and enrolled part-time, and who had smiled at every person who looked through him. He thought about Earl Hodges' employee, who had bought a house 2 blocks from the store. He thought about the corridor between hope and cynicism, and which direction the door was opening. He straightened. He went back to work. Richard Hale accepted the terms on Tuesday morning. Not all of them, without question. He had called Patricia on Monday afternoon with 2 requests for clarification on the auditing timeline and 1 question about the arbitration mechanism in the sunset clause, both of which were genuine questions rather than attempts to renegotiate, and which Patricia had answered with the clean precision of someone who had anticipated exactly those questions. By 9:15 Tuesday, the response from Richard's office was a single paragraph. Whitmore Industries accepted the terms as written. A revised partnership framework incorporating the new conditions would be prepared by their legal team within 5 business days for Daniel's review. Patricia called Daniel the moment she received it. They accepted. Daniel was in the backyard. Marcus had a half day at school, and they had been out there for the past 20 minutes doing what Marcus called bird inventory, which was a process Marcus had invented that involved sitting very still near the feeder and writing down every species that appeared in a small notebook he kept specifically for this purpose. Daniel had been handed his own notebook and a pencil and instructed to write down whatever he saw, and had been doing so obediently, while his mind moved through the morning's correspondence. All of it. Every clause. The leadership restructuring the advisory board authority, the auditing structure, the sunset clause. Patricia paused. The sunset clause, Daniel. They accepted the sunset clause. Richard understood what it meant. He did, and I think he was grateful for the clarity. Send our acknowledgement. Tell them we'll review the revised framework within 48 hours of receipt. Done. And Daniel. Another pause. The pause of someone who had been working without sufficient sleep for a week, and who was allowing herself briefly to feel the weight of what had just concluded. We did good work. You did extraordinary work, Daniel said. Sleep this week. I'll sleep when the framework is signed. He ended the call. He looked at his notebook. He had written down 3 birds, a house sparrow, the cardinal again, and something small and brown that he was not able to identify. Marcus would know. Dad. Marcus was pointing at the oak tree in the corner. His voice was the careful lowered voice he used during bird inventory. Red-tailed hawk, up in the corner branch. Daniel looked. There it was. Large, still looking down at the yard with the absolute composure of something that understood exactly where it stood in the order of things. Write it down, Marcus whispered. Daniel wrote it down. They sat in the yard for another 10 minutes, quiet watching. The hawk stayed in the oak tree for 7 of those minutes and then lifted without urgency, without announcement, and was gone. That's the 3rd time we've seen him this month, Marcus said in his regular voice now that the hawk had left. I think he lives in that tree. Probably. Dad. Yeah. Is it done the business stuff? Daniel looked at his son. It's moving in the right direction. Is that the same as done? No. Done takes longer. But moving in the right direction is the important part. Marcus considered this. Like how learning to read took a long time, but the important part was when it stopped feeling hard. Exactly like that. Marcus wrote something in his bird notebook with the focused concentration of a scientist recording data. Okay, he said. Good. Dana Park had waited 9 days. She called on Wednesday morning, and Daniel answered, which was itself information. An answered call, rather than a returned one, meant he was ready. I appreciate the patience, Daniel said. I told you to take the time you needed. I know. I'm calling to tell you that I'm still not ready to give you a full account of what happened at the gala. I may never be ready for that specifically. A brief silence on Dana's end, but Daniel said, I'm willing to talk about the initiative, about what it's supposed to accomplish and why that matters, and what the structure looks like now. Not about the personal events of that evening. The personal events of that evening are the story people want, Dana said carefully. Not pushing, just being accurate. I know, but the communities in Cleveland, Detroit, Indianapolis, and Columbus that this initiative is supposed to serve are the story that matters, and I'm willing to talk about that on the record. Another pause. Can I ask you one thing off the record first? Ask it. Are you okay? Daniel was quiet for a moment. It was the same question Marcus had asked him, and Gloria had asked him, and it kept arriving from different directions, the way important questions do. I'm clear, he said, which is better than okay. That's a good answer. It's the honest one. Okay, Dana said. Tell me about the communities. He told her, not everything. He told her what the initiative was designed to do, what the restructured framework looked like why the Community Advisory Board with genuine authority mattered in a way that previous versions of similar programs had failed to account for. He talked about Earl Hodges and the hardware store, without naming him, describing the principle rather than the person. He talked about what it meant to make investment decisions based on character as much as financials, and why he believed that framework produced better outcomes over time. He talked for 40 minutes. Dana let him talk. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Daniel, I have to ask you one more thing. Go ahead. People are going to read this story, and they're going to want to know about the man who turned down $3 billion in investment and came back to the table with better terms. They're going to want to understand who you are. And right now, the only picture they have is a man nobody had heard of who was publicly humiliated, who made one phone call. She paused. Is that the story you want? Daniel thought about it. The story I want, he said, is the one about what gets built. Not what happened to me in a ballroom. What gets built in the neighborhoods. That's the story that matters in 10 years. And the story about you. I'm a single father from Dayton, Ohio, who learned from his mother that the only dignity worth having is the kind you build yourself. That's all the story about me that anyone needs. Dana Park was quiet for a long moment. I'll write it that way, she said. I know you will. That's why I called you back. The article ran on Friday. Dana Park had written it exactly as she'd promised. The focus was the initiative, the communities, the restructured framework, the community advisory board, with genuine authority, the independent auditing structure. Daniel was described simply and accurately founder of Brooks Capital Group, private investor, and the lead architect of the revised partnership terms. There was a single paragraph about the gala that described the incident without embellishment and without naming Alexander Whitmore, stating only that a public incident involving another attendee led to the temporary suspension of the agreement and a subsequent restructuring of its leadership and accountability framework. That single paragraph was enough. Everyone who needed to know knew. The financial press had been filling in the details for a week already, and the carefully understated language of Dana's piece somehow communicated more than an explicit account would have. It had the particular power of restraint, the power of a man who had been given an opportunity to be publicly vengeful and had chosen instead to be publicly purposeful. Daniel read the article at 6 in the morning over coffee before Marcus woke up. He read it once. He put his phone down. He got up and started making breakfast. His phone buzzed 3 times in the next 40 minutes. Gloria, who had read it and whose text said simply, "That's my boy." Andre, who sent a string of business-like observations about the likely market response. And an unknown number which turned out to be Margaret Osei from Foundation Partners in Minneapolis, who had somehow acquired his cell phone number, making her the third person in 2 weeks to accomplish this feat. I read the article. I'm in. Whatever the revised framework looks like, Foundation Partners is committed. Call me when you're ready to talk numbers. M. Osei. Daniel looked at that text for a long moment. Then he looked up at the ceiling of his kitchen and breathed. That was the moment he knew it was going to work. Not the acceptance from Richard Hale. Not Patricia's 41 pages. Not his conversation with Victoria, or his call with Richard, or any of the careful, deliberate work of the past week and a half. It was Margaret Osei's text at 6:40 in the morning, because Margaret Osei had been in this business as long as Richard Hale and had the same quality of judgment that came from 4 decades of watching what held and what didn't, and Margaret Osei would not commit to something she didn't believe in. She believed in it. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, hair pressed sideways from Sleep Field Guide already in hand, which meant he had picked it up before he was fully awake, which was a habit so deeply established that Daniel had stopped marveling at it. Waffles. Waffles, Daniel confirmed. Marcus climbed into his chair. Dad? Yeah. I had a dream about the hawk. What happened in the dream? How was teaching other birds how to fly? Even the small ones who already knew how. He was showing them something different, like not just how to fly, but how to fly so that nobody could make you come down. Daniel stood at the counter with the waffle iron and looked at his son. 6 years old. Alicia's eyes. That's a good dream, Daniel said. I know, Marcus said, and opened his field guide to a page he had bookmarked with a folded piece of notebook paper. What day is it? Friday. Is it a school day? It is. Marcus looked at the field guide. He looked at the waffle iron. Okay, he said with the tone of a person who has reviewed all available information and arrived at acceptance. Daniel made the waffles. Alexander Whitmore came to Columbus on a Thursday 3 weeks after the gala. He came alone. No assistant, no lawyer, no advance preparation of any kind that Daniel's office had been made aware of. He had called Clara directly. She had told Daniel immediately, who had thought about it for 2 minutes, and then said to schedule 15 minutes and not a minute more. He arrived exactly on time, which Daniel noted. Clara showed him in. Daniel was standing rather than sitting, which was not a power gesture. He simply wasn't a man who arranged furniture for psychological effect. He was standing because he had been on his feet all morning and hadn't thought to sit down. Alexander Whitmore looked different from the man in the ballroom. Not diminished exactly, but quieter, as though something that had been running at a particular velocity for 61 years had been forced to slow, and the slowing had revealed a different texture beneath the momentum. He looked at Daniel. He did not extend his hand immediately, which told Daniel he had thought about this moment and understood that a handshake was something that had to be offered and accepted rather than assumed. "Thank you for seeing me. Sit down." They sat. Alexander looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "I've been trying to figure out for 3 weeks what to say to you. I've had people tell me what to say. My communications team, my lawyer Richard, even my daughter." He stopped. "I've decided not to say any of it." Daniel waited. "What I did was wrong," Alexander said. "Not a misunderstanding, not a mistake in judgment. Wrong. I looked at you and I made a decision based on what I saw and what I assumed, and then I acted on it in a way that was designed to humiliate you in front of as many people as possible." He held Daniel's gaze. "I've been in business for 31 years. I've done hard things and competitive things and things that I'm not proud of in the way business sometimes requires. But I have never done anything that was purely about making another person feel small, until that night." He stopped. "And I want you to know, not for your forgiveness, because I don't have the right to ask for that, but just so that it's said clearly between the two of us. In a room without lawyers, I know what I did, and I know why I did it, and the why is the part that I'm going to have to live with." The office was quiet. Daniel looked at Alexander Whitmore. He looked at him the way he looked at everything important, with complete attention, without the filter of what he wanted to see or expected to see, just what was actually there. What was actually there was a man who had said a true thing. An uncomfortable, specific, self-implicating true thing, with no legal cushioning and no narrative management, in a room where there were no witnesses except Daniel himself. That meant something. It didn't erase anything, but it meant something. "I hear you," Daniel said. Alexander nodded. He was not expecting more than that, and not asking for it. "The initiative," Alexander said. "The terms in the proposal, I want you to know that I accept them not because I had no choice. I accept them because they're right. The structure we had was built around my oversight, and my oversight is exactly the problem. Victoria is going to run the operational side. She'll be better at it than I would have been." "I know," Daniel said. "I spoke with her. She told me." A pause. "She said you asked her what she intended to do differently. She said it was the hardest question she'd ever been asked in a professional setting. It was a direct question. She gave you a direct answer." "She did." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "She's the best thing I've built," he said. Not with pride exactly, with something more like recognition. The recognition of a man who had spent his life building companies and had just understood at 61 that the most important thing he'd built was a person, and that person had turned out better than he deserved. Daniel said nothing. "I know this is a 15-minute meeting," Alexander said. "I don't want to overstay." He stood. He looked at Daniel. "I'm not going to ask you to think better of me. I don't have the standing for that. But I want to say one more thing." Daniel waited. "The communities this initiative is going to serve the neighborhoods in Cleveland and Detroit and Indianapolis and Columbus. I've been to 3 of them in the past 2 weeks, on my own. No announcement, no press, no advance coordination." He stopped. "I should have done that before we announced the program. I should have been in those places before I put my name on anything connected to them." He looked at Daniel directly. "You understood that. I didn't. And the distance between those two understandings is the distance between what we built and what we should have built." He extended his hand. Daniel looked at it for a moment. He shook it. Alexander Whitmore left. Daniel stood in his office alone for a long moment. He thought about what Richard had said. Some things require a person to pick up a phone. He thought about what his mother had said, "Don't let it make you small." He thought about Alicia's handwriting slanting to the right, bunching the letters together like they were in a hurry. I thought about Marcus in the yard, writing down hawks in a small notebook, absolutely certain that the important thing was to pay attention to what was actually there. He picked up his phone and called Gloria. She answered on the second ring. "Baby." "Hey, Mom. You sound different." "Different how?" "Lighter." He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe." "Tell me." He told her briefly without the business details, just the essential shape of it. The week. The proposal. Richard's acceptance. Margaret O'C's text. Victoria's visit. Alexander 15 minutes ago in the chair across from his desk, saying a true thing with no cushioning and no audience. Gloria listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "Tell me. That science fair. You were 12. That man in the navy blazer." Her voice was steady, but not effortless. "I thought about that for years, Daniel. I thought about whether I had done enough to prepare you for it. Whether there was something I should have said or done differently." "Mom, let me finish." A breath. "And then I watched you grow up and build what you built and be the father you are to Marcus. And I stopped thinking about whether I'd done enough, because the answer was in front of me." She paused. "That man in the navy blazer looked through you at a science fair when you were 12 years old. And you went and built $3 billion and used it to open hardware stores and restart restaurants and rebuild communities. And a man poured wine on you at a gala and you froze $3 billion in a phone call and then you went home and made waffles." She stopped. "I just want you to know that I see all of it, the whole line from there to here. And I am so proud I can't find the right words for it." Daniel stood in his office. He pressed his eyes closed for a moment. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, baby." A pause. "How's Marcus?" He dreamed about a hawk teaching other birds to fly. Gloria was quiet for a moment. "Lord," she said softly. "That child." "I know. Go make him something good for dinner tonight." "I will." "And eat something yourself." "I will." "I mean it." "I know you do." He ended the call. He looked out the window. The brick neighborhood, outside the one in the process of becoming something, was bright in the late morning, people moving on the sidewalk, a small business across the street with a handwritten sign in the window that Daniel had been watching for 3 months, go from coming soon to open to last week. "Thank you for your support 1 year." He watched it for a moment. Then he went back to his desk. The revised framework was signed 6 weeks after the gala. Not at a ceremony, not at a gala, not in a hotel ballroom with 400 guests and a string quartet and crystal chandeliers. In a conference room at a community center in Cleveland's Howe neighborhood, with representatives from the community. Advisory board, present, 8 people, 4 of whom had lived in Howe for more than 20 years, along with Daniel and Patricia, and Richard Hale, and Victoria Whitmore, and the lead attorneys for all parties, and Margaret O'C from Foundation Partners, who had flown in from Minneapolis that morning. The room was not impressive. The chairs were mismatched. There was a water stain on the ceiling tile in the corner that someone had made a half-hearted attempt to paint over. The coffee was from a machine in the hallway, and it was mediocre. Nobody commented on any of this. Before the signing the chair of the Community Advisory Board, a woman named Dolores Watkins, 64 years old, who had lived in Howe her entire life, and who had the particular authority of someone who had seen promises made and broken in this neighborhood enough times that her standard for belief was very high, stood up and said something that Daniel would carry for the rest of his life. "I want to be clear about what this document is," Dolores said. "It's not a promise. We've had promises. This is a set of conditions. And conditions are different from promises because conditions have teeth." She looked around the table. The people in this neighborhood didn't ask for charity. They asked for the same thing every neighborhood asks for: the chance to build something that lasts. So we're going to hold this agreement to exactly what it says every quarter without apology, because that's what our community deserves. And I want everyone at this table to understand that before we sign. She sat down. The room was quiet. Daniel looked at Dolores Watkins. He thought about Earl Hodges, who'd been to 3 banks. He thought about James, who was at Columbus State on a full scholarship this semester. He thought about the employee at Earl's store, who had bought a house 2 blocks away. I thought about the corridor between hope and cynicism, and about which direction the door was opening, and he thought that Dolores Watkins was the reason the door mattered in the first place. Not the $3 billion, not the 41 pages of legal architecture, not even the Community Advisory Board, with genuine veto authority. It was the people in the corridor who had kept showing up despite every reason not to, who had built their own forms of resilience in the absence of investment, and who were now sitting at a table with conditions that had teeth and intending to use them. The signing took 11 minutes. Patricia had organized everything with her characteristic precision, the right documents in the right order, tabs marking every signature line, no wasted motion. Each party signed. The Community Advisory Board representatives signed. The attorneys countersigned. When it was done, Dolores Watkins did not celebrate. She put the cap back on her pen, looked at the documents, looked at Daniel and said, "Now we work." "Now we work," Daniel agreed. Chapter. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning, Marcus was doing his bird inventory in the backyard, and Daniel was sitting on the back steps with coffee watching him do it, when his phone buzzed with a text from Sophia Bennett. They had been in contact twice since the gala, once, when she had texted the office after the signing was announced publicly, with a brief and genuine note of congratulation. And once when Daniel had responded with a thank you that had somehow become a 20-minute text conversation about whether good institutions were built by good systems or good people. A conversation that had ended inconclusively and pleasantly. The text said, "I saw the piece in the Dispatch about the Cleveland signing. The photograph of the community center conference room. The mismatched chairs." A pause. That was the right room to be in. Daniel looked at the text. He looked at Marcus, who was writing something in his notebook with great seriousness. He typed back it was. A moment later, "How's Marcus?" He smiled. He typed, "He's convinced the hawk living in our oak tree is the same one he's been tracking since April. He has 17 data points. Is he right? Probably. He usually is." A longer pause. "I've been thinking about what you said the night of the gala. About the person you want to be when you're alone with your son at the end of a long day. What about it? I think that's the most useful measure of a person I've ever heard. I've been trying to apply it to my own life. Is it working?" Slowly. "But yes." Daniel looked at the oak tree in the corner of the yard. The hawk was there. Marcus had spotted it 8 minutes ago and recorded it in his notebook with the careful precision of a scientist who understood that consistency of observation was the foundation of understanding. The hawk sat in the branch with its characteristic composure, looking down at the yard, unhurried and completely itself. "Good," Daniel typed. "Slowly is fine. Slowly means it's real." He put the phone in his pocket. "Dad." Marcus was pointing at the feeder. "Yellow warbler. First one this fall." Daniel looked. Small, bright, improbably vivid against the ordinary morning. "Write it down," Daniel said. Marcus was already writing. Daniel drank his coffee. "I thought about a 2-bedroom apartment in East Dayton, Ohio, and cracked hands in January, and a 12-year-old boy at a science fair who decided to be hungry instead of small." He thought about 47 investments and 1,000 rooms where someone looked at him and saw something they'd already decided before he opened his mouth. He thought about Alicia's laugh and Marcus's field guide and Patricia's 41 pages and Dolores Watkins saying, "Now we work." He thought about a red wine stain on a white dress shirt collar and 7 words spoken quietly in a silent ballroom and 1 phone call that lasted 40 seconds. I thought about what it meant to build something in a world that had spent your entire life telling you the building wasn't yours to do. To build it anyway. Carefully, one decision at a time, with your mother's voice in your ear and your son's eyes watching, and the knowledge, hard-won and unshakable, that the only dignity worth having is the kind no one can pour away. Marcus closed his notebook. He came and sat beside his father on the steps. They sat together in the ordinary Saturday morning in the yard, with the hawk in the oak tree, and the yellow warbler at the feeder, and the coffee going cold in Daniel's cup, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. Some things are complete, not when everything has been resolved, but when you understand clearly and without doubt that what was built was worth the building, that the work was real, that the people it was built for were real, and that the man doing the building knew exactly who he was and had never not once let anyone take that from him. Daniel Brooks was that man. He had always been that man, and no glass of wine poured by a frightened man in a bright ballroom was ever going to change that.